Video games are enjoyed by everyone. With so many genres and playstyles, there's something for each player. But due to the lack of accessibility features, players who are disabled can have a hard time enjoying some of these games. Though mobile games are generally pretty accessible, I could definitely make it better. So this week, I worked on adding accessibility features and an options menu in the game. This was inspired by Mark Brown's video from Game Maker's Toolkit on how to design games for people with disabilities. This game relies on color for information. So the first thing I had to absolutely implement was a colorblind mode. I used symbols on the tiles to differentiate between the different colors. And then I checked on an online colorblind filter to see if I was able to distinguish the tiles. All the game in the text is big enough, and there is not a lot of text. But sometimes text can be hard to read for players who are visually impaired. So I added a slider that changes the size of the text. I also added a contrast text option that adds a shadow to the text and makes it easier to read. Next, I wanted to add settings for players with cognitive disabilities. Some fonts can be harder to read for players who have dyslexia. I added an option to switch out the font for a clean, easy to read sans serif font. Repeating patterns and effects can cause a sensory overload for various conditions. So I added an animation option that turns off all the animations. Though these animations are pretty simple and small, I still wanted this setting to be available for the players. The next thing on my list was adding settings for players with motor disabilities. Some motor disabilities makes it hard for players to tap precisely. So I added a slider that allows the player to change the size of the tiles. I also added an option to change how the player flips the board, allowing players to swipe or double tap. I already had the functionality for double tapping. All I had to do was uncomment some of the code. You can also turn off the vibration if you'd like. Once I was done with these accessibility settings, I added the standard volume sliders for sound effects and music. These were all the settings that I could think of. If I get suggestions on how to improve a setting or add a new one, I'm gonna add those too. These accessibility features not only help players who are disabled, but also benefit from something known as the curb cut effect. Sidewalks or curbs have these ramps at the end of them. They were initially designed for wheelchair users. But these ramps also help cyclists, people with strollers, skateboarders, delivery workers, and almost every pedestrian in some way. This is the curb cut effect. I've experienced this firsthand. I always turn on subtitles for the games I'm playing. Since English is not my first language, it can be tough for me to understand some dialogues and callouts. Game developers should always include accessibility features in their games. It opens the game up to a wider audience and allows everyone to experience it. These new settings caused some bugs. After I fixed them up, I called it a night. Next week, I'll be working on adding a new mechanic to the game.